Hello students, I'm Sakshi Mathur, your science teacher. Today we are going to start a new topic, that is pollination. Before starting this video, I hope you have watched the previous video where we have learnt about the different parts of the flower. Please watch that video first and then come back to this topic again for better understanding. What is pollination? Now, in our video or where we have learnt about different parts of the flower, we have learnt that in a flower we have male reproductive system and a female reproductive system, where the pollen grains are present in the anther, that is the stamen part, and we have the female reproductive system that consists of a pistil basically, where stigma, style and ovary are present. What is pollination? This is a very important concept with regards to the formation of fruit, formation of the seeds. It is because of this pollination only. So we need to understand first what is pollination. Migration of pollen grains from stamen to stigma of a carpel is called as pollination. Now, stamen, you all are aware that it is a male reproductive part of the flower, right? And in the stamen we have anther and the filament. In the anther you have seen that there are small light yellow grain like structures present, which are called as the pollen grains. Now pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the pistil. Stigma is a sticky substance or the sticky part of the pistil basically, where the pollen grains need to be transferred. This concept of transferring, migration means movement or transfer of pollen grains to the stigma, is called as pollination. In nature, pollination is of two types: self-pollination and cross-pollination. We will understand each type of pollination separately with the help of examples and the pictures. Self-pollination. The name itself suggests that pollination is taking place within the flower of a same plant. Like if a plant is having 2 or 3 flowers, same plant is having 2 or 3 flowers, and the pollen grains are transferred from the flower to another flower of a same plant only, that is called as self-pollination. Or within the same flower also, if pollen grains are transferring, it is called as self-pollination. You can see the picture that in a flower both the female and male parts are present, and if the pollen grain falls on the female part, that is called as self-pollination. Cross-pollination. What is cross-pollination? That means mixing of pollen grains. Now pollen grains are being transferred. Pollination taking place between flowers of 2 different plants of same species. One thing that you need to remember in cross-pollination is that the pollination occurs between the 2 different plants, whether the plant is from a distant apart or from one place to another, the pollen grain has to move. This pollination takes place within the same species only. Like if the pollination is of a tomato plant, then the pollen will go to the tomato plant only. That is called as cross pollination. That is the same species concept. You cannot mix 2 different flowers like tomato with rose and anything, like no 2 different plants cannot be mixed in this category. So pollination taking place between flowers of 2 different plants. The 2 different plants can be near also, and they can be far away from each other also, but they should be of same species. You can see the picture that on the left side I have one flower and on the right side I have one flower, so they are distant apart, right? So the pollinator, that is the honeybee, sits on one flower. The body of the honeybee the pollen grains are stick to that, and then as the pollinator moves from one place to another, the pollen is also transferred in this way. This is called as cross pollination. You can see that in the picture it is very clearly depicted that how the pollen grain of a left flower is transferred to the pollen of the stigma of the next right side of the flower, right, with the help of the honeybee or the pollinator. Now the question arises, how does a pollen grain move from one flower to another? We need to understand that the pollen grains do not have legs, right? So how they are moving from one place to another, or who are carrying the pollen grains from one place to another? Is it the human beings or someone else? Let's find out. Yes, we found the answer. That is, they are the agents or the carriers of pollination. Who are carrying the pollen grains from one place to another? The agents or the carriers. Who are these agents? And let's understand. First is wind. As the wind blows, pollen grains are light in weight. They move from one place to another. Second is water. Insects, most common pollinator. And last is the bird. So all these four are the carriers or the agents of the pollination, where they carry the pollen grain on their body and accidentally they drop it on the same species of a plant, and then pollination takes place. Now, if the pollen grain has fallen on the stigma through a self-pollination or through a cross-pollination, what is the role of falling the pollen on the stigma? What is the need of carrying this pollen grain from one place to another, or from the stamen to the stigma part of a same flower also? What is the need of that? The need is to carry the process of fertilization. What is fertilization? Now we will understand. We have learned that the transferring of pollen, how it takes place. First of all, transferring of pollen to stigma is called as pollination. There are two types of pollination, self and cross. And who carry the pollen grains? That is the agents or the carriers of the pollination. Pollen grains reach stigma due to pollination. This we all have understood. Now, what happens as soon as the pollen is dropped on the stigma? The pollen grain develop a pollen tube which reaches the ovary. You can see the picture. As soon as the pollen is dropped on the stigma, it develops a tube like structure which goes to the ovary of the female part. Now, the male gametes travel in the pollen tube and fuses with the egg cell of the ovary. Fuses means meets the egg cell of the ovary. This process is called as fertilization. Now the question can occur in this form also, at how does the male gamete transfer into the egg cell? It is with the help of pollen tube, which is developed by the pollen grain. Now we have understood that the pollen grain, as soon as it lands on the stigma, it develops a tube where the male gametes are present, and the male gametes are transferred to the female egg cell of the ovary through the tube. Now what happens? The egg cell is converted into the zygote, ovule is converted into the seed, ovary is converted into the fruit. Yes, the fruit that we eat from the plants is the ovary. The seed that we see in the fruits, it's the ovule, and the formation of that particular fruit, that when it starts, that is called as the zygote. The egg cell is converted into zygote, ovule is converted into seed, and ovary is converted into fruit. So this was the concept of transferring the pollen to the stigma, because we need to carry out the process of fertilization. If we want fruit from the plant, that means pollination is the first step. Then fertilization would take place, and then only we would be able to generate fruit from the plant. I hope you have understood the concept of pollination. Thank you and have a nice day. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel.